Good day, Greg. All right, Hebron Zoom, you hear me all right? Okay, excellent. Thank you. Good. Thank you very much. Aishi, I'm good. All right, I will say good morning. Let us begin. I want to begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning. To thank the Elbaum Mishpacha, our Talmud Torah sponsor for the month of Shvat, for dedicating all the Shiurim and Drashos this month in memory of Jerry Elbaum, Yaakov Koppel ben Avram Menachem Zichron Livracha. Thank Mrs. Bracha Strimber for being our Talmud Torah sponsor as well for the month of Shvat, dedicating all the Shiurim and Drashos in loving memory of her husband Avi Strimber Avram ben Kalman Eliezer Halevi on the occasion of his 9th yahrzeit. We have a Daf Yomi sponsor this morning, Samuel Slamowitz, with continued gratitude and appreciation for all of the meaningful shiurim. Very special, thank you. We thank all of our sponsors for their generosity and commitment to the shul, to the shiurim, and also with that, let us begin. So we have a lot to do today. Today's daf is Ayin Ches 78, and we are picking up Emir Hashem on Ayin Zayin Amud Beis 77b, and we're picking up Ella Kasavar Rabbi Yoshua. So we'll say it's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 lines up from the bottom. Suppose if you remember again, we had a machlokes. Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Eliezer that began on the bottom of Ayin Zayin Amud Aleph. And in that machlokes, the Gemara was referring to what do you need in order to go ahead and make a carbon effective. Rabbi Yoshua paskined that halacha l'maisa you need both dam and basar. Rabbi Eliezer said that halacha l'maisa dam is enough even if there's no basar. That was the machlokes. So Rabbi Yoshua, dam and basar. Rabbi Eliezer, just dam by itself is enough. We also took that machlokes into menachos. You'll say to yourself, but Rabbi again, where's the dam in menachos? Remember again from yesterday, the dam in menachos is the kamitza, right? The offering of the kamitza is the equivalent to the zrikas hadam. So there's a whole machlokes. Does Rabbi Yoshua, does he maintain that shita just by karbanos and not by zach or not by menachos or not? That's machlokes. So we'll continue to say with this same thing. Alakasav Rabbi Yoshua. Rather, Rabbi Yeshua holds hatzitz meratza al ha'achilus. So the Gemara suggests that Rabbi Yeshua himself holds that not only is the tzitz meratza, not only does the tzitz affect atonement for that which for the dam, but the tzitz also is meratza, affects atonement for the consumption of the sacrificial meat as well, which Rabbi says is an incredible chiddush. If that's the case, then why did the Gemara say before and then according to Rabbi Yoshua, because in the case quoted in the Brisa, it would be possible. Avad v'sarav, that was referring to a case where the meat was lost or the meat was consumed or burnt. In other words, it was no longer accessible. Ela nitma leman katani. So in the case of nitma, according to whose opinion was it stated? Rabbi Eliezer, that was Rabbi Eliezer. To which the Gemara says pshita, that's obvious. Hashta yesh lomar avad v'sarav lesnu mach Rabbi Eliezer. If in a case of avad and saraf, where there is no meat, Rabbi Eliezer holds the carbon is still effective because halacha by Rabbi Eliezer, all you need is dam. Nitma the isemi boy, then obviously if the sacrificial meat is present, but it became tameh, it goes without saying that according to Rabbi Eliezer, the carbon should still be good. Elapshita the Rabbi Yoshua v'katani psula. The Gemara says rather again it's in accordance with Rabbi Yoshua. The Gemara says v'katani psula. But ultimately, again, the Mishnah states that the Brisa states that it's possible. But Otanya Rabbi Yeshua Omer. Furthermore, again, the other problem with this is the Brisa says as follows. Rabbi Yeshua says, Kol zvachim shabatora, bein shenitma basar v'chelev kayim, bein shenitma chelev ubasar kayim. In general, karbanos in the Torah. Karbanos in the Torah, whether the meat became tameh and the chelev is in perfect shape, kayim means it's in existence, or the chelev became tameh and the meat is in existence, zorik es adam, that allows you to do zrika. So as long as you have some type of basar, be it basar or chelev, that allows for zrika. Aval nitmu tarbayu, but if both the basar and the chelev became tameh, lo, you can't go ahead and do zrika. Alma kasav Rabbi Yoshua ein hatzitz miratza al ha'achilos. Thank you. Ein hatzitz miratza al ha'achilos. Ein hatzitz miratza al ha'olin v'lo al ha'achilos. So Rabbi says, so therefore again the Gemara Rabbi Yeshua holds here, it actually changes it in the little aleph. Ein hatzitz miratza lo ala olin v'lo ala achilas. Therefore, we'll say it must be, could it be that Rabbi Yeshua holds that Allah Lemaisa that sits is not meratza for anything, not for the parts offered up on the mizbeach, nor for the parts that would be consumed. Ella liolim Rabbi Yeshua. Rather, the Gemara says, in fact, it reflects the view of Rabbi Yeshua, or the other Rabbi Yeshua he must nisin. V'lo kashya kan lechatchila. Kan di eved. Both say the Mishnah and the Brisa do not pose a contradiction to each other. Why? One is talking about a case lechatchila, which and one is, and the second kan is the Mishnah, is talking about a situation of bidi eved. Kiyam Rabbi Yoshua lechatchila di eved lo. Ultimately, again, when does Rabbi Yeshua say that Allah you need both dam and basar in order for the carbon to be effective? That's when the lechatchila. So, this is actually an incredible dramatic idea. The Gemara now is suggesting that Rabbi Yeshua holds that you need both basar and dam in order to make the carbon effective. That's only the chatchila. But b'di'eved, ultimately, again, even Rabbi Yeshua will agree that dam will work without basar. So I will say, therefore, again, remember, just to kind of tie this all together, our Mishnah that we saw in yesterday's daf was speaking about a situation, chamisha dvarim, 5 things which can be brought in a state of tumah. 5 things which can be brought in a state of tumah. And halacha l'maisa, even though they can't be consumed, they're still able to affect, quote unquote, atonement. And remember, not all of these karbanos are brought for atonement purposes. They're able to be effective. So we were trying to suggest that our Mishnah can't reflect the view of Rabbi Yoshua, because Rabbi Yeshua requires both basar and dam. And obviously in the cases in the Mishnah, you'll have dam, but you will not have basar. Because remember again, the Mishnah is telling you could offer up these karbanos, but remember again, you can't consume them. So the Mishnah must not reflect the view of Rabbi Yeshua, to which the Gemara says, maybe not. Maybe in fact, Rabbi Yeshua holds that you need basar v'dam l'chatchila, but b'di'eved, dam by itself is going to be enough. And perhaps again, our Mishnah is not talking about l'chatchila, but b'di'eved, to which the Gemara says, well, let's analyze this. How do you know that Rabbi Yeshua makes a distinction between the chatchila and b'di'eved? This sanya, because we learned nitma basar o shenifsal o shiyatza chutz l'kilayim. So as we learn the following: if halacha l'maisa, the meat, sacrificial meat, became tamei, or ultimately again it became possible, or it was taken outside of the kilayim. We'll say the kilayim referred to the curtains, the boundaries of the Beis Hamikdash. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Yizrak. Rabbi Eliezer says you're permitted to go ahead and do zrikas hadam. Rabbi Yeshua Omer lo Yizrak. Rabbi Yeshua says you can't do zrika. Omod Rabbi Yeshua Shem Zarak Hortza. But Rabbi Yeshua agrees that halacha l'maisa, if you did zrika, it works. So I'll say, here you see it. Here you see that the chatchila Rabbi Yeshua requires basar v'dam, but b'di'eved, even in the absence of basar, the dam could still be used to affect the atonement of the carbon. So this is incredibly important, because it turns out that then the machlokes Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Eliezer is not as dramatic as we thought it to be before, right? Beforehand, we thought that Shitas Rabbi Yoshua was you must always have dam and basar for the carbon to be effective, and Rabbi Eliezer holds all you need is basar. All you need is dam. You don't need basar. But now, interestingly enough, it turns out the Gemara is suggesting that even Rabbi Yoshua, who requires dam and basar, that's only lechatchila. But ultimately, again, b'di'eved, he will only require basar. He will only require dam, not basar. Says the Gemara. Let's go weiter. So Rabbi Shlomo Chada. So the Gemara says there's 2 problems with this. Chada the psula di eved mashma. Number one, is an issue that when the Brisa tells us these cases, it says psula. So we'll say psula is a lashon of even bidi eved. Va'od chamisha dvarim ba'im lechatchila mashma. We'll say furthermore, our Mishnah, when it speaks about the 5 things that can be brought in a state of tumah, that really sounds like they could be brought even lechatchila. So we'll say the Mishnah's case is a case of 5 sacrificial items which can be brought lechatchila, even though what? you will not be able to consume the basar. So again, at most, what you're getting from Rabbi Yoshua is that lechatchila you need basar v'dam, bidi eved dam is enough. But yet the Mishnah seems to indicate that you could offer up these 5 kabaros, even lechatchila, ultimately without the basar. Elo, top of Ayin Chasar, say 78a, first word. Elo lo kashya. Right, the Gemara says not a contradiction between the Brisa and the Mishnah. Can be yachid, can be tzibur. One is talking about the yachid, one is talking about a tzibur. Rashi says over here, be yachid lechatchila psula, v'imzara kortza, u'masnisin b'tzibur b'ayin lechatchila. Well, here's the distinction. Rabbi Yeshua hold like this: by a yachid, lechatchila you need basar v'dam, but b'diavad dam is enough. Tzibur lechatchila dam is enough. Very interesting. So the Gemara says, "Ne'ema season look Rabbi Yossi." So apparently our Mishnah does not reflect the view of Rabbi Yossi. The Sanya Rabbi Eliezer Omer Hatzitz Miratza Al Ha'achilos. The tzitz allows for consumption, right? So not only is the tzitz, not only does the tzitz allow for those items which were offered up in a state of tumah to be effective, but the tzitz even allows for consumption. Rabbi Yossi Omer Eina Tzitz Miratza Al Ha'achilos. Rabbi Yossi says, no, not true. The tzitz does not allow for consumption. To which the Gemara says, that because Rabbi Yossi says that the tzitz does not allow for consumption, therefore halacha l'maisi he must hold like Rabbi Yoshua, da'amar ba'inan tarti, because Rabbi Yoshua holds that you require both, right? You require both dam and basar. Neima hashta masnisin delok Rabbi Yossi. So now we're going to say now that our Mishnah does not reflect the view of Rabbi Yossi. No, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Eliezer, now the Gemara says no, Rabbi Yossi in fact holds like Rabbi Eliezer, namely that dam is enough even without the basar. Damar dam apapi shein basar ihachi lemay hilchasa eina tzitz miratza al achilos. Suppose say, I don't understand. If you hold that all you need is dam and you don't need basar, so then why do we even have to bring up the fact that the tzitz is not meratza al ha'achilos, that the tzitz does not allow you to consume the sacrificial meat? It's okay. We don't need you to consume the sacrificial meat. Why not? Because the carbon is effective just with the dam. In other words, just to be clear, the whole discussion about if the tzitz is meratza al ha'achilos, if the tzitz allows for you to consume kind of problematic sacrificial meat, that really only matters according to Rabbi Yoshua, who needs both dam and basar. But according to Rabbi Eliezer, who just needs dam, I don't need the tzitz to be meratza al ha'achilos. Ulutamich, Rabbi Eliezer, the amar tzitz meratza. According to Rabbi Eliezer, says that the tzitz is meratza. Kevan the amar dam afapi shein basar hatzitz meratza al ha'achilos lamay So Rabbi says the same kasha. And according to Rabbi Eliezer himself, who only requires dam, doesn't require basar. Why does the tzitz have to be meratza an achilos? Ella, so we'll say that's actually very important. L'mikvei bepigul ulafuke midei meila. Rather, I will say when we say that the tzitz is meratza al ha'achilos, what this does matter for is the following: the ability to make the carbon into pigul. I will say, remember again, pigul is if the kohen during any part of the avoda has in mind to eat the carbon outside of the prescribed time, then the carbon becomes pigul, becomes disqualified for consumption. Me'ila, of course, again refers to an inappropriate use of consecrated property. Halacha l'maisa, only once a carbon is offered up is it no longer subject to me'ila. So what the Gemara suggests is as follows: that when we speak about the tzitz being meratza al ha'achilos, what that will allow is for the carbon to become pigul, and ultimately, again, for the carbon no longer to be subject to the halachos of me'ila. And the Gemara suggests that this is a machlokes. Rabbi Eliezer says also this is fascinating, that the tzitz is meratza ala achilos. Not only does the tzitz allow for the sacrificial portion that was put on the mizbeach to be effective, even if it was tamei, but the tzitz actually allows for the meat itself to be consumable as well. Now, why does this matter? So the I'll tell you why. So Rabbi Eliezer Savar, meratza tzitz iluya. The tzitz affects quote unquote atonement for the basar as well. Umashvi leikiv tahar. Therefore, again, the sacrificial meat that's consumed ultimately is like tahar. Therefore, the kavalei bepigul. Therefore, it is subject to the halachos of pigul. And furthermore, umapik le midei me'ilah. And it is no longer subject to the halachos of me'ilah. Rabbi Yossi Savar, Lo meratza tzitzilu. Rabbi Yossi, on the other hand, holds that no, the tzitz is not meratza al ha'achilos, velo mashvi leketar. Therefore, again, the sacrificial meat, the basar, is not treated like it's tahar, and therefore, as a result, velo kavile bepigol, velo mapikle midei mi'ilah. Therefore, again, I will say halacha l'maisa, it is not subject to pigol, nor has it been removed from the status of mi'ilah. So we'll say, really quite. I'll tell you what's incredible. I know there's a lot of sacrificial information swirling around over here, but understand these sugyas are fascinating because of the principles also that you see. So this notion ultimately, so also we have a lot of stuff going on over here. We have machlokes related Rabbi Yeshua. Ultimately, again about halacha l'maisa, what you need in order to make an effective carbon. So Rabbi Yeshua says dam and basar, blood sprinkled on the mizbeach, consumption of sacrificial meat. Rabbi Eliezer holds all you need is dam, you don't need basar. It sounds like what the Gemara is saying over here is maybe Rabbi Yeshua only holds that lechatchila, but b'diavad that's not the case. But even then, Rabbi Yeshua only holds lechat. But maybe he'll make a further distinction between yachid and a tzibor. A yachid lechatchila requires dam and basar. B'diavad dam is enough. A tzibor dam is enough even lechatchila. Okay, so that's what we're holding in that machlokes. Now Rabbi says there's another machlokes going on over here. We know that tzitz, right, the golden plate that the Kohen Gadol wears, has the ability to affect atonement. It's really affect was the wrong word. Has the ability to affect effectiveness. It's not right English. It's not good English, but that's the better way to say that. Has the ability to create effectiveness for a carbon offered up in a state of tumah. Right? That we know. The shaila is, does the tzitz also have the ability to impact the basar, the sacrificial meat which would be consumed? That's a machlokes. That's a machlokes. Interestingly enough, what the Gemara just did was say something dramatically amazing, which is the Gemara says, Rabbi Eliezer, now remember, what does Rabbi Eliezer hold? In general, what do you need in order for a carbon to be effective? Dam, that's all. Interestingly enough, Rabbi Eliezer holds that the tzitz is meratza al ha'achilos, that the tzitz creates effectiveness for the basar as well, which is so strange because he doesn't need basar. What's the impact of that? Rabbi said the impact of that is once the tzitz is meratza ala basar or ala achilos, that basar will be subject to pigul, and ultimately again will no longer be subject to mi'ilah. So just very interesting, really riveting. So we'll say, by the way, one more machlokes in all of this, which the Gemara touched on yesterday, which is what? When we say that tzitz is meratzas, remember what was the machlokes we saw? When is the tzitz meratza? Does the Kohen Gadol have to be wearing it, or even just the mere presence of the tzitz allows for effectiveness? So again, the Gemara did not resolve that either. So maskif Rav Mari Nehi Nami Rabbi Yossi Savar Kar Eliezer. Now that you told me Rabbi Yossi was Kar Eliezer, Bishlam Zvachim Ikadam. So I understand karbanos have dam. So we'll say fine. Rishitas Rabbi Eliezer is that Allah Lamaisa for a carbon dam is effective. Omer, Nami Ika Kometz. So even by the carbon Omer, remember we said this just before, that Allah Lamaisa, the carbon Omer, or for that matter, any mincha, has a kometz, right? The three fingerfuls that are offered up. So remember again, dam is to a carbon, or I should say, kamitza is to the mincha, what dam is to the carbon. Lechem aparim, Nami Ika Bazichin. Lechem aparim also has the spoonfuls of frankincense. Elashtea lechem ma'ika l'mim. We'll say, what about shtea lechem? Right? What's the effective dam by shtei alechem? V'chitema likari v'moin. So maybe you'll say, remember again, the shtei alechem is the karbanos offered up, or is the two loaves of shavuos. So what's the accompanying? What's the dam equivalent there? So maybe you'll say it's the karbanos that are offered up along with it. No, because hainu shamit tzibor. That's the Mishnah already spoke about shamit tzibor. Imkein habalu arba va'anan chamisha tanan. So the problem is, if you say that shtei alechem refers to the sacrifices that accompany it, we already learned that halacha l'maisa, those are shamei tzibor. In which case, the Mishnah doesn't really have a list of 5. The Mishnah has a list of 4. To which the Gemara says, Imkein avalu arba va'anan chamisha tnan. And ultimately, again, we in the Mishnah, right? The Mishnah says 5 items. Ela kasav Rabbi Yossi tuma hutra b'tzibor. Rather, Rabbi Yossi also said that in general, tuma hutra b'tzibor. So says, now this is a dramatic idea over here that up until now we were focusing on halacha l'maisa tuma dechuya b'tzibor, and now the Gemara saying Rabbi Yossi shita is tuma hutra b'tzibor. I v'hatanya echad zeh ve'echad zeh mazan alav kol shiva. So is that true? That Rabbi Yossi holds tumot Rabbi Tzibor? What about the following case? Well, listen to this. But we learned in the Brayso, echad zeh ve'echad zeh mazan alav kol shiva mikol chato shahayu sham div Rabbi Meir. So we'll say, if you look at Rashi for just a moment, Rashi says over here, echad zeh ve'echad, that's the first white line in Rashi. Echad koin asorif esapara. Both the Kohen Gadol who is being readied for the avoda of Yom Kippur and the Kohen Gadol who is being readied for the avoda of Para Aduma. In both of those circumstances, the Kohen was sequestered for 7 days prior to the avoda to properly prepare him for the avoda. So the Gemara says, Echad zeh v'echad zeh, mazin alav kol shiva. This is very interesting. They would sprinkle upon the Kohen Gadol before Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol before the service of Paraduma. They would sprinkle upon him with waters, ashes of Paraduma, all 7 days of his sequestering. Mikol chatal shayish. Rabbi Yossi says no. We'll say second wide line ayin chesem dalif. Ein mazin alav el shlishi ushvi bilva. Rabbi Yossi is not true. You only sprinkle on him on the days number 3 and day number 7. These sakadai talkas Rabbi Yossi tumot Rabbi Tzibor. And if according to Rabbi Yossi we hold tumah hutch Rabbi Tzibor, remember we spoke about this yesterday. Remember the machlokes tumah duchuyi b'tzibor, tumah hutch Rabbi Tzibor. What happens when 51% of the klal is tamei? Do we say that effectively the laws of tumah just don't apply? That's tumah Rabbi Tzibor. Or do we say no, the laws of tumah apply, but they're temporarily set aside? There's a dispensation. If you hold tumah Rabbi Tzibor, lamali hazah klal, then why does the Kohen have to be sprinkled at all? Rather, you have to say that rather it appears to be that our Mishnah does not reflect the view of Rabbi Yossi. Good. Rabbi Yossi, this is great. Remember again, Rabbi Yossi quoted a brisa. We quoted Rabbi Yossi in a brisa yesterday that seemed to make no sense. Or Rabbi Eliezer said that the halacha. Rabbi Yossi said that the halacha follows right. Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Eliezer in both cases. So the Gemara is now we're going back to revisit that. So Rabbi Yossi shtara mizakele lebeitrei. We'll say literally translated. This means Rabbi Yossi wrote a document of sale of the same item to 2 people. In other words, he sold the same object to 2 different people. This sanya, because what did we learn yesterday? Daf Rabbi Yossi. Roa anias divrei Rabbi Eliezer bizvachim, v'divrei Rabbi Yoshua bizvachim. Remember again, what did Rabbi Yossi say? I see the words of Rabbi Eliezer by karbanos, and the words of Rabbi Yoshua by karbanos. V'divrei Rabbi Eliezer by menachos, Rabbi Yoshua by menachos, and the words of Rabbi Eliezer by menachos, and the words of Rabbi Yoshua by menachos. Divrei. So remember again, that's a contradictory statement. So who are you holding like? You can't hold like both of them, because remember again, they have a fundamental machlokes. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer bizvachim. What does it mean that I see the words of Rabbi Eliezer by Zvachim? Remember, Zvachim refers to animal sacrifices. Shahaya Omer Dam Afa Pisha in Basar. Because Rabbi Eliezer holds that by Karbanos, Dam is enough even without Basar. Tiv Rabbi Yoshua Bizvachim. And I see the position of Rabbi Yoshua by Zvachim, because what does Rabbi Yoshua hold? Shahaya Omer Im Ein Dam Ein Basar, Im Ein Basar Ein Dam. And Rabbi Yoshua holds you need both dam and basar. Div Rabbi Eliezer b'menachos. I see Rabbi Eliezer's position by menachos. Shaya Omer kometz afa pisha in sham shirayim. That Rabbi Eliezer holds that halacha l'maisa by menachos. It's enough if you go ahead and you have shirayim, right? I'm sorry. It's enough if you have the kometz, even if you don't have shirayim, which Abba says is the same. Remember, same shita. The kometz by the mincha is the equivalent to dam by zvachim. V'di Rabbi Yoshua b'menachos shaya omer im ein sham shirayim ein kometz. Im ein kometz ein shirayim. Because Rabbi Yoshua hold that halacha l'maisa you need both the kometz as well as the shirayim. So we'll say, so what's going on over here? Amrle mistabra ka'amar ki kai bizvachim. So then we're saying mistabra ka'amar ki kai bizvachim amar mistabra kichi de pligi bizvachim pligi nami b'menachos. So let's listen to this. So the Gemara says as follows. So Kikai Bizvachim. So what Rabbi Yossi was saying was like this. When Rabbi Yossi was in the sugya of Zvachim, so he would say, Mistabra, it's clear to me, the same way that Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua argue in Zvachim, they also argue in Menachos. Kai b'Menachos, when Rabbi Yossi was holding in the sugya of Menachos, Amar, Nistabra kihechi de pligi b'menachos, pligi nami b'zvachim. So I will say when Rabbi Yossi was holding in the sugya of menachos, he would say the same way that Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua argue in menachos, they also argue in zvachim. So I will say, so interestingly enough, all Rabbi Yossi was saying was the same machlokes applies in both situations. So when he was learning about zvachim, he would say, the machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua in zvachim also applies in menachos. And when he was learning menachos, he would say, the machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua about menachos also applies in zvachim. Amar lehateinach kikai bizvachim ar mistabra keche di pligi bizvachim pligi na b'menachos. So the Gemara is like this. I understand. If you want to say when Rabbi Eliezer is learning zvachim by karbanas, he says the machlokes Rabbi Yeshua by karbanas is the same machlokes by menachos. So the Gemara says the ikar kroi kiksivi bizvachim ksivi. Because remember again, the primary psukim that serve as the point of machlokes, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, are written by zvachim. But here's the problem I was saying. It makes sense to say that when Rabbi Eliezer was learning the sugya of zvachim, he would say the same way that there's a machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua in zvachim, there is also a machlokes in menachos. Because Rabbi was saying the ikar machlokes is in zvachim. Because remember again, the ikar machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua is how to darshan the psukim by zvachim. So that makes sense. But to say that when he was in menachos, he would say, the same way they argue over here by menachos, they also argue in zvachim. That doesn't make sense. Because also remember again, menachos is not the ikar machlokes, right? The ikar machlokes is by zvachim, and we apply that to menachos. But the opposite way doesn't make sense. To which lo kasha. Rather, what Rabbi Yossi meant was as follows: Roa ani asiv Rabbi Eliezer ben Nitma, v'div Rabbi Yoshua ba'avud v'saraf. Rather, what Rabbi Yossi meant was as follows: I see the position of Rabbi Eliezer that all you need is dam when the sacrificial meat became tamei. V'div Rabbi Yoshua, and the position of Rabbi Yoshua ba'avud v'saraf, in a case ultimately again where the meat was lost or was burned. The Gemara says, "Benitma my taima." Why is it that ultimately a person like Rabbi Eliezer in the case of nitma, mishum demaratzi tzitz? Because ultimately, again, the tzitz affects atonement. Hasham said Rabbi Yossi damarina tzitz meratza alachilos, and you see from here that Rabbi Yossi holds that alach lemaisa the tzitz can be meratza on the part of the carbon that's offered up on the mizbeach, but not on the achila. Lo kasha roa ani es dir Rabbi Eliezer b'tzibor, roa ani es Rabbi Yoshua biyochid. Maybe what Rabbi Yossi meant was as follows: I see the position of Rabbi Eliezer b'tzibor. The Rabbi said by tzibor, by karbanos tzibor, dam will be enough even without the basar. And I see the position of Rabbi Yoshua b'yachid, by karbanos yachid, that by karban yachid you need both what? Dam and basar. B'tzibor my time. What's the reason for b'tzibor? The Gemara says mishum de tuma hutra b'tzibor. Ultimately, again, because Rabbi Yossi will hold that tumas hutra b'tzibor. The Gemara says here's a couple of problems with that. Chada. The Shammos say Rabbi Yossi damer tumo tuchui b'tzibor. Furthermore, again, we have Rabbi Yossi on record as saying that tumo is tuchui b'tzibor. That's aleph. Va'od beis. Furthermore, eats b'tzibor. Rabbi Eliezer machshav lo Rabbi Yoshua. And if we're supposed to talk about b'tzibor, would Rabbi Eliezer not hold that the dam is enough by karbanos tzibor? That would be Rabbi Eliezer would machshir and not. I'm sorry, the ibit tzibor Rabbi Eliezer machshav lo Rabbi Yoshua. But say we just said before on the top of Mamish, the first line of Ayin Chesam Dalif, that even Rabbi Yoshua agrees that by karbanos tzibor, dam is enough. Dam is enough. Amid Beis Rabbosai, ha amrit b'tzibor afilu Rabbi Yoshua modeh. We learned before, first line on Ayin Chesam Day 78b. We learned before Rabbi said that with karbanos tzibor, even Rabbi Yoshua agrees that lechatchila dam is enough. Ella, rather, so was just trying to interpret Rabbi Yossi's statement. Ella, roa ani estiv Rabbi Eliezer b'di eved. Rather, maybe what Rabbi Yossi was saying was like this: I see the position of Rabbi Eliezer b'diavad, and the position of Rabbi Yoshua lechatchila. Meaning what? Lechatchila, you should have both dam and basar. B'diavad. Ultimately, again, dam will be enough, even if you don't have basar. So the Gemara says, "Di'avad afilu Rabbi Yoshua nami modeh." But one second, we just said before that b'diavad, even Rabbi Yoshua is modeh. that dam is enough. Diktani, Modi Rabbi Yoshua Shimzara Kurza. Rabbi Yoshua said, Allah Chalamais, as much as L'chatchili you require both dam and basar, Bidi Avid, if all you had is dam, that is going to be enough. Habituma, Haba Abud V'saraf, to which the Gemara says there's a distinction. One is talking about a situation of Tuma, and one is talking about a situation where the sacrificial meat was lost. Ki Katani, Mode Rabbi Yoshua, Shimzara Kurza, Benitma. When we say that Rabbi Yoshua holds that Allah Chalamaisa, if Zrika was done, that if you did the Zrika, that it works as a case of Nitma, Abba V'saraflo. But if halach l'maisa, the sacrificial meat was lost or was incinerated, then halach l'maisa Rabbi Yeshua would agree that it would not work. Kikam Rabbi Yossi, Rani Esti Rabbi Eliezer, b'di eved ba'aved v'saraf. When does Rabbi Yossi hold that I hold that halach l'maisa? Again, I see the words of Rabbi Eliezer. That's only b'di eved. I promise, it's going to get better. Everybody's leaving. Mamish, it's going to be good. It's going to be good. Torah hiva lilmod amitzarech. Wow. Scared to look at my Yelp ratings after this. Okay, so the Gemara says as follows. So the Gemara, right, the Avid B'saruf. So I'll say, so the Gemara says, when, so ultimately, Kikam Rabbi Yossi, when does Rabbi Yossi say, did I see the words of Rabbi Eliezer? Only B'di Eved in the case of Avid and Saruf. So we'll say, okay, so a lot going on over here. What's the halacha l'maisa? So we'll say, so again, here are the points to keep in mind. Number one, fundamental machlokis, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua, right? That we've seen. Rabbi Eliezer holds all you need is dam. Rabbi Yoshua holds you require both dam and basar. It appears that the way the Gemara refined the shita of Rabbi Yoshua is that Rabbi Yoshua only requires that lechatchila, but b'di eved he would agree that dam is enough. And by karbanos tzibur, communal offerings, he holds that halacha l'maisa, dam is enough lechatchila. So we'll say this is very important. Let's see the sugya. Let's see the Gemara over here. The Rambam. So this, I'm pointing to over here, the Rambam. Actually, two Rambams that I'm going to show you over here. Same parak. Parak Aleph in Psuli HaMokdashin. Halachas Lamed Aleph and Lamed Daled. So listen to this. So actually, let's just do Lamed Daled. Kol Azvachim Shal Yachid. So we'll say when it comes to individual sacrifices, Bein shenitma basar ba'chalav kayim, whether the meat became tamei and the chaylev is in existence. Bein shenitma chaylev basar kayim zorek es hadam. So we'll say, so when it comes to karbanos yachid, individual sacrifices, as long as the basar or chaylev, some type of meat, is in existence, ultimately again you could do the zrika. Nitmu shnehem lo yizrok. However, if there's no basar, I will say, remember, what do you do with chaylev? You offer chaylev on the mizbeach. So I just want to point out, this goes back to yesterday's daf, that according to Rabbi Yoshua, basar need not mean basar that you could eat. Basar could also mean basar that's offered up on the mizbeach. Rabbi Yoshua just says there has to be some basar in addition to the dam. So therefore, again, whether you have actual sacrificial meat that you could consume or chaylev, then you could do this zrika. What happens if you don't have basar or you don't have chaylev? Let's say they both became tamei. Then halacha l'maisa, you shouldn't do zrika. You shouldn't offer up you shouldn't do zrika on the dam. Vimzara kurza, but if you did zrika, the carbon works. Shitas Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi Yoshua will say, halacha l'maisa l'chatchila by karbanos yachid, by an individual carbon, you need both basar v'dam. Basar means either basar you could consume or basar offered up on the mizbeach like chaylev. So ideally for a carbon yachid, you need both basar v'dam. Therefore, if you don't have basar, why wouldn't you have basar? You lost the basar became tummy. You shouldn't do zrika. But if you did zrika, the carbon works. Why? Shat sitz miratza ala tuma. V'chein eivari olo nitu go, so on and so forth. V'chol karbanos hatzibur shenitma habasar v'achelev kulo harez ezorek es hadam. Rabosa by karbanos tzibur halacha l'maisa, even if there is no basar lechatchila, you could do zrika on adam. So Rabosa halacha l'maisa, we paskin like Rabbi Yoshua. So again, Rabosa, this is your takeaway from this sugya. The takeaway is lechatchila, a carbon requires basar v'dam, right? Basar, either basar that a kohen or an individual would eat, or basar that is offered up on the mizbeach like chaylev, and dam, of course, is a sprinkling of the blood. For a carbon yachid, if you don't have basar, you really shouldn't do zrika. But if it is zrika, b'di eved, the carbon works. For a carbon sibur, l'chatchila, you could do zrika even if there is no basar. Beautiful. We'll say new Mishnah. Nitma basar v'chaylev kayim. We've quoted this before. So halacha l'maisa, nitma basar v'chelev kayim. If you went ahead and the basar became tummy, but the chelev remained in existence, eno zorik es adam. So also, I just gave you this Rambam. You shouldn't do zrika lechatchila. Shouldn't do zrika. However, nitma chelev v'abasar kayim zorik es adam. But halacha l'maisa, if the chelev became tummy, but the basar is still in existence, you could do zrika es adam. Mikdashim ain't okay. But I will say, but other. So remember this over here. I want to point out over here. This is should be clear. This first part of the Mishnah is talking about Karban Pesach. Karban Pesach. So nitma basar. If the meat of the Karban Pesach became tamei, the chelev kayim, but the sacrificial fats, right, are offered up on the mizbeach. Are in existence. Eino zorik es adam. You should not do zrika. I will say we're going to see Pesach is different because the ikar of Pesach is what? Is what? Consumption, eating, correct. So therefore, again, if the basar is tamei, but even if you have the chelev, you still shouldn't do zrika of the Pesach. But conversely, if the basar is good, the basar is fit, the basar is kosher, the basar is edible, and the chelev became tamei, under those circumstances, ultimately, again, you could do zrika. But I will say, ultimately, again, by other karbanos, this is not the case. Ella, this is what we just said before. Pesach is unique. By general, in all other karbanos, all you need is what? All you need is what? Basar or chelev, right? B'diavad, correct. But all you need is basar or chelev. By Pesach, in order to do the zrika of the karban Pesach, the basar itself must be edible. If the basar is not edible, even if you have chelev, you can't do the zrika. So we'll say, let's analyze. Amar Rav Gidl, Amar Rav, Im Zara Kurtza. So we'll say, halacha l'maisa, if you went ahead and you did zrika. So we'll say, now we're talking about Karban Pesach. So let's say you have a case now of Karban Pesach where the meat of the Pesach became tamei. So what did the Mishnah tell me? If the meat of the Pesach became tamei, then what? I should not do zrika on that animal. I should not do zrika on that karban. Let's say you did zrika. So what's the halacha? Hurtza, the karban Pesach works. So we'll say, now understand what that means. What does it mean the karban Pesach works? Can you eat the karban Pesach? Can you eat it? No. Why? The basar's tamei. But we'll say what it does mean is you would not have to what? You would not have to do Pesach Sheni. That's what it does mean. Remember, that's the ramification over here. So Rav Gidl says in the name of Rav that as much as the Mishnah told me that if I have a Karban Pesach whose meat became tamei, even though again I still have valid chelev, I can't do zrika because Karban Pesach, the ikar of Pesach is consumption. And if you can't consume the meat, you can't do zrika sadam. But Rav Gidl comes along and says, but if you did do zrika ex post facto, the karban works, and you would not have to do Pesach Sheni. V'haba ein nachila. But one second, I understand. How do you say that the karban Pesach works? The ikar of karban Pesach is consumption. If you can't eat the karban, then how does the karban work? To which the Gemara says, achila lo ma'akva. Achila of the Pesach is not ma'akiv. As much as you need achila, Rabosai, achila is not an indispensable part of the karban. So the Gemara says, really? Vaksiv ish lefiach lo limit ish lefiach lo. But the pasuk says each person according to his eating. It sounds pretty clear that you have to eat the karban Pesach. The mitzvah. Ultimately, again, yes, lechatchila you should eat the karban Pesach. But ultimately, again, that's just lechatchila. It's not ma'akev. Ula'akev lo. The Gemara says, really? Consumption of the karban Pesach is not ma'akev. Vatanya we learned b'michsas. So remember again, we've seen this before. The pasuk says, "B'michsas nefashos." Remember again, michsas literally means the number, right? Remember again, in order to partake of a karban Pesach, you have to be part of a chabura. You have to be numbered as part of one of the chabura. This teaches me that a karban Pesach could only be shechted for those who were counted as part of the chabura. You might have thought that if you shecht the karban Pesach for someone who was not part of the registered chabura, that although again you're in violation of a positive commandment, maybe the karban is still kosher. Talmud lomar ish lefiach lo tachosu. The pasuk says each person according to his eating shall be counted. Hakasuv shana alav la'akev. The Torah goes ahead and repeats this. The Talmud Rabba say that it's ma'akev, that in order to consume a karban Pesach, Halacha l'maaseh, you must be a registered, numbered participant. The iskish ochlin l'minuyin. And also we go ahead and we compare those who partake of the carbon to those who are counted as part of the chabura. So you see from here pretty explicitly that consumption of the carbon Pesach is the essence of the carbon, right? If we're so makbid on registered participants, right, that the carbon has to be consumed, or I should say, the chabura must be made up of people who can consume it and people who are registered, ultimately, again, on the carbon. So what does that tell you? That tells you that consumption of the carbon is an indispensable part of the Pesach. Ella Rav Damar Rabbi Nassan Damar Achilas Pesachim Lo Ma'akva. Rather, Rabbi say Rav holds like Rabbi Nassan, and Rabbi Nassan holds that the consumption of carbon Pesach is not ma'akiv. Rabbi say this is incredible because now what the Gemara is doing is advancing an opinion who holds that consumption of Pesach is not ma'akiv. That is as lechatchila. Of course, you should eat the carbon Pesach. But if for some reason you can't eat the carbon Pesach, halacha l'maisa, you can still fulfill your obligations. So I'll say, so follow its progression over here. The Mishnah told me that halacha l'maisa, if I have a case of carbon Pesach where the meat became tameh, even though the chaylev is still in existence, I can't do zrika. Now that by Pesach. Now that stands in contradistinction to every other carbon. Because every other carbon was supposed to say, what do we say? What did we just say? As long as there's some type of basar, either basar or chaylev, you could do zrika, and that's even by karbanos yachid. And even by karbanos yachid, if you did zrika, even if there is no basar, b'diavad what? The carbon is kosher. But by Pesach, you can't do zrika without basar. You must have meat, because again, the essence of the carbon Pesach is consumption. Comes along Rav Gidel and quotes in the name of Rav, but if you did zrika on a carbon Pesach, whose meat is tameh and therefore not consumable, you're Yotze. You're Yotze, which means, again, for our purposes, you would not have to do Pesach Sheni. To which the Gemara goes bonkers. What are you talking about? Consumption of the carbon Pesach is the essence of the carbon. How can you be Yotze with the carbon Pesach that you can't consume? To which the Gemara says, Chitas Rabbi Nassan. Apparently, there's Rabbi Nassan is on the books as saying that Achilas Pesachim is not Ma'akev. So the Gemara says, which Rabbi Nassan? Hey, Rabbi Nassan. So we'll say this is actually very interesting. Hey, Rabbi Nassan. Ilema ha Rabbi Nassan. This Sanya. Rabbi Nassan Omer Minayin Shekal Yisrael Yotzim Pesach Echad. Well, this is very interesting. Maybe it's the following Rabbi Nassan. Rabbi Nassan says, how do you know that all of Klal Yisrael can be Yotzei with one carbon Pesach? Well, this is very interesting. One carbon Pesach on behalf of the Klal. How do you know that technically speaking that could work? Talmud Lomar. To also kol kehal adas rabin arbaim. Because the Pasuk said, listen to the wording of the Pasuk. The Pasuk says, and they will shecht it, the entire assembly of the Jewish people. The Gemara says, v'chi kol akal shochtin, could the entire, right, does the entire kehila shecht, v'alo ein shochet ela echad, only one person shechts, ela melamid shekol Yisrael yotzei pesach echad. I will say, interesting, Rabbi Nassan holds that technically speaking, if someone were to offer one lamb on behalf of all of Klal Yisrael, it would work. It would work. Now there's a practical issue there, to which the Gemara says, I will say, so what you understand, what's the practical issue? Obviously, if all of Klal Yisrael is being yotzei with one lamb, there's not enough what? There's not enough meat. There's not enough meat. Oh, so you see from here what? You see from here that consumption of the carbon Pesach is not ma'akiv. It's not ma'akiv. To which the Gemara says, that's not a good raya. I'll tell you why. Tilma shayni hasam. We'll say, I'll tell you why it's not a good case. Because technically speaking, that carbon is consumable by everyone. Why? Because we'll say, at any given moment, if some people withdraw, other people could partake. And if other people withdraw, then other people could partake. In other words, this is very different than a carbon Pesach which becomes tameh. So we'll say, what's the status of a carbon Pesach which becomes tameh? No one could eat it. Over here, when you have one carbon offered up on behalf of everyone, who could eat it? Who could eat it? Technically, everyone. Okay, you have a practical issue that there's not going to be enough meat if everybody wants to eat it, but technically speaking, it is consumable by everyone. Maybe that's the case Rabbi Nassan holds, that one carbon works on behalf of the Klal. Allah Rabbi Nassan. Rather, you say, remember, we're looking for the shita of Rabbi Nassan who holds that achila is not ma'akev. That consumption of the carbon Pesach, while lechatchila it's good, bidi evident is not necessary. So rather, it's following Shita Rabbi Nassan. The Sanya nimnu alav chabura achos Let's listen to this case. Let's say you have a Korban Pesach, and you have a Chabura. You have a group of people who are part of that Korban Pesach. Now, both say. Now, remember again, when Chabura A, there's enough meat. There's a kizayis for everyone. Both say. Then what happens? V'nimnu alav Chabura acheres. Now Chabura B joins with Chabura A, and what's the problem? So we'll say, so now what's the problem before we get to this? The problem, of course, is that now when Chabura B joins, there's what? There's not enough meat. There's not a kazayis of meat for everyone. So the Gemara says like this. So what's the status of Korban Pesach? So the Gemara says, Chabura, so Rishonim Sheishlan kazayis ochlin upturim l'asas Pesach Sheni. So the first group, who when they were part of this Chabura, there was a kizayis of meat for every member of the first group. They're Yotzei, the Korban Pesach, and don't have to do Pesach Sheni. Achronim Sheman kizayis ein ochlin v'chayav l'asas Pesach Sheni. But say Chabura B, who when they joined, there was clearly not a kizayis for each of them. They are not Yotzei with this Pesach, and they must do Pesach Sheni. So that's the first opinion, right? The first opinion, everybody has to be able to eat. Rabbi Nassan Omer, Elu v'elu p'tur milasas Pesach Sheni, shekar nizrak hadam. Rabbi Nassan says, no, everybody's Yotzei. Everybody's Yotzei. Why? Because the Zrika was already done, and therefore everybody is Yotzei the Korban. So we'll say, what do you see from here? You see from here that according to Rabbi Nassan, what? Achila is not ma'akev. To which the Gemara says, no, I'll tell you why that's not a good case. The Gemara says, Akati dilma shayni hasam, dimemashchi hani, chazi lahani, chazi lahu. Because we'll say, even in this case is different. Why? Because we'll say, in this case, what could always happen? Members of Chabura A could pull out, and Chabura B would therefore have enough meat. So we'll say, what the Gemara is suggesting over here is like this. In these cases of Rabbi Nassan, maybe Rabbi Nassan is just allowing for a Korban Pesach that where there is the possibility of consumption, even if there's not the probability of consumption. But maybe even Rabbi Nassan would agree that where the Korban Pesach cannot be consumed, like in a case of Tumah, that you would not be Yotzei with such a Karban. Emkein, if that's the case, Lisnei Hoel Uru'uyum Limashech, then go ahead and say, since Chabura A could pull out, Chabura B could eat, therefore Chabura B is Yotzei as well. My shekvar nizrak hadam. What does it mean when you say the blood was already sprinkled? So shmamina bedam talya milsa aval achilo ma'akva. Rather, again, you see that Rabbi Nassan holds that halacha lemaisa, really the essence of Korban Pesach is totally on the zrika and not on achila. So Rabbi said this is pretty incredible. So now there is this shita of Rabbi Nassan who holds that achila is not ma'akev by Pesach, which Rabbi said goes against everything we've ever seen by Korban Pesach. But yet Allah Rabbi Nassan holds that the ikra of Korban Pesach is really by zrika and not by achila. So the Gemara says, I'm just going to ask you, my duchke derav dimokim le masnisun lechatchila of Rabbi Nassan. So both say, remember again, let's go back for just a moment. What did the Mishnah say? Right, we had a Mishnah, and the Mishnah said that Allah Lamaisa, if you have a Korban Pesach and the basra became tamei, even if the dam, even if the chelev is in existence, what's the halacha? What's the halacha? Right, by Korban Pesach, Eino zorik es adam. You can't, right? Eino zorik. You can't do zrika. You can't do zrika, right? So because the Mishnah said that halacha lemaisa, you have to be able to eat the Korban Pesach. Now comes along Rav Gitz. Now comes along Rav, and Rav says, by the way, that's only lechatchila. But b'diavad, if you actually did the zrika, then what? Then what? The Korban works. In accordance with whose opinion? Rabbi Nassan. Rabbi Nassan, because Rabbi Nassan holds that halacha lemaisa, achila is not ma'akev. Right, lechatchila, you don't have to be able to eat the Korban. Or b'diavad, if you did the zrika, even on a Korban you can't eat, you're Yotzei. To which the Gemara says, I don't understand. Why does Rav have to set up the Mishnah as dealing with the case of lechatchila and therefore have it align with the position of Rabbi Nassan? Nukma kirabanan, right? Instead, establish the Mishnah like the Rabbanon. Va'afilu di'eved namilo. See, Rabbi say, here's the difference. According to Rabbi Nassan, lechatchila you have to eat the Korban Pesach. But b'di'eved, if you have a Korban that you can't eat, like Korban Pesach that became tamei, and you did zrika, the Korban works. According to the Rabbanon, if you can't eat that meat, that Pesach meat, even if you did zrika, what? The carbon's not good, and you have to do Pesach Sheni. So why don't you set up the Mishnah as talking even b'di'evet and according to the Rabbanon? To which the Gemara says, Rav masnisen kashise. Because Rav had a problem with the Mishnah. What was the problem with the Mishnah? Amai tani ein zorek es adam. Why does the Mishnah say that if the basar became tameh, you can't do zrika? Instead, let the Mishnah just say, if the basar Pesach became tameh, listni pasal. Just say pasal. Why do you have to even bring up zrika? Ela shmamina in zorek lechatchila aval di eved shapir dami. Rather, I will say in Rav's view, it must say that the Mishnah was teaching me that halacha lemaisa I can't do zrika lechatchila, but I can do it b'di'evet. So I will say, I just want to point out over here, this is a raging machlokes. This is a 3-fire alarm machlokes over here, I will say, which is incredible. So I will say, halacha lemaisa, what do you do with a karban Pesach whose meat has become tameh? According to the Rabbanon, pasal agamre. They're nothing. It's nothing. You can't do anything with it. You'll just have to do Pesach Sheni. That's it. Rabbi Nassan, not true. Bidi Eved, you could do zrika. You could sprinkle the blood even of a Pesach whose meat is not consumable, because Rabbi Nassan holds that Allah achila is not ma'akev. You could do zrika, and you would not have to do Pesach Sheni. Both say incredible. Rabbi Nassan, ish lefiach lo lamali. And according to Rabbi Nassan, who says that you don't need achila, what at least b'di'evet? What does he do with the pasuk ish lafiach lo? The ba'inan gavra de chazil achila. No, Rossi. Even Rabbi Nassan agrees. The lachatchila you have to eat the karban, right? Lachatchila you have to. Furthermore, again, only people who technically can consume sacrificial meat are proper to be part of the chabura. So let's just do a few more lines. So is the opinion who says the following: Shachtu la'ochlav v'zarku damu shaliachlav. Let's listen to the following case. We'll say first of the wide lines. So what happens if you shechted the karban, having in mind for people who can consume it? Le'ochlav. Le'ochlav means people who are part of the chabura, people capable of eating the Pesach. V'zarku damu shalo li'ochlav. And I both say then when you did the zrika, you had in mind for people who are not part of the chabura, or for people who can't go, really people who can't eat the karban, like someone who's sick or elderly. So what's the halacha? Pesach atzmo kasher, v'adam yotze bo yedei chovaso. Halacha l'maisa, the Pesach is still kasher, and you can fulfill your obligation, even though when you did the zrika, you had in mind for people who can't eat it. So whose opinion is this? Kiman. Neymar Rabbi Nassan v'lo Rabbanan. It must be Rabbi Nassan and not the Rabbanan, because Rabbi Nassan holds that achila is not ma'akev. To which the Gemara says no. Afilu tema Rabbanan ve'ein oin machshavas ochlin bezrika. And I will say this could even be the Rabbanan. We saw this concept before. I will say that halacha l'maisa, an erroneous mindset by zrika regarding consumption does not invalidate the zrika. Man Tanalu will say one more line, 3 more lines. So who is the opinion who says the following? What happens if someone was ill? A member of the chabura was ill at the time of shchita, but was healed at the time of zrika, or chalim b'shas shchita, or ultimately again he was well, he was healed at the time of shchita. The chola b'shas zrika, and he was ill at the time of zrika. Ein shochtin v'zarkin alav ad sheyehi chalim mishas shchita v'ad shas zrika. You can't shecht on behalf of someone unless they are totally healthy from the time of shchita until the time of zrika. So Kiman, whose opinion does this reflect? Neimer Rabbanan nivalo Rabbi Nassan. It must be the Rabbanan and not Rabbi Nassan, right? According to Rabbi Nassan, halacha l'maisa achila is not ma'akev. To which the Gemara says, no. If you tim Rabbi Nassan, gavra dechazil achila bina. We'll say, remember again, even according to Rabbi Nassan, even though that he will hold bidi eved, achila is not ma'akev, he will agree that when you shecht on behalf of a person, that person must be fit. And if that person is not fit to consume the karban, enachinami, he will invalidate the karban. So I'll say it's very interesting. What you see over here is Rabbi Nassan. Now I want to be clear. I'll say even Rabbi Nassan holds the chatchila, you have to eat the karban. He's just saying that bidi ever achila is not ma'akev. And what he's saying is those who are part of the karban must be fit to consume the karban. And if they're not fit, then enachinami, they can invalidate. Fine, one more line. So the Gemara says, Man tanalu dutan rabbanan, shachtu b'tara. No, let's actually we'll stop over here. We'll stop over here with this. Oh, we'll do one more minute. Man tanu rabbanan. We'll say just this will get a little bit of traction for tomorrow. Man tanu rabbanan. We'll say who is the following opinion reflecting the following brisa? Shachtu b'tara va'achar kach nitmu abaylim. If you shechted the carbon while everybody was tar. But listen to this. After shchita, before zrika, everybody became tameh. Now, Rashi points out, where do you have a case like this? Rashi says, let's say the Nasi died. The Nasi died. How did the Jewish people die? Everybody went to the Levaya. So he died sometime, but before the Zrika, so everybody was tar at the time of the Shechita, and ultimately, again, they became Tameh before the Zrika. What's the halacha? Yizrak hadam betara va'al yochol abasar betuma. So ultimately, in both sides, so halacha l'maisa, you go ahead and you do this rikas hadam, but you do not go ahead and eat the basar. So kiman, Rabbi Eliezer b'machlokes shnuya. This statement is actually immersed in machlokes. Rabbi Nasani and it's Rabbi Nasan. I will say again. Remember, it's Rabbi Nasan holds. Obviously, you can't eat. You could do this rika in this case, but you can't eat the meat. So what do you see from here? That halacha l'maisa again, achila is not ma'akev. Rabbi Yochanan Amar afilu tema rabbanani. Could even be the rabbanon hachamay askinan betzibor dafilu betuma nami avdi. I will say this is talking about betzibor, and remember again, betzibor you even do the carbon pesach in a state of tuma. I betzibor amay ein habasar ne'echal betuma. If that's the case, Rabbi say if it's betzibor, then again Rabbi say then you should be able to remember again. All the Brisa has said is that you're allowed to do zrika. But if it's betzibar, if the 51% of the kehila of the klal is tameh, then why can't you eat the carbon as well? Gezera shema yitmu habaylim la'achar zrika. Because I will say the concern is next year what may happen. Let's say you might have another situation where the people will become tameh, but they became tameh after zrika. The Yomer, and they'll say ishtaki lo nitmu v'achalnu. Last year when we became tameh, we ate the carbon. Hashtanami nechol. So too now we can eat as well, and they won't realize the distinction. Below yadi deishtakit ki izdirik dam bailim tmeim havu hashta bailim tuahorin havu. We'll say there's a big distinction between when the zrika was done, when the tzibur was tamei, versus when the zrika was done, when the tzibur was tar. Technically speaking, when the zrika was done, when the tzibur was tamei, they could eat the meat even in a state of tumah. But if the zrika was done when the tzibor was tahar, and then they became tameh, they cannot go ahead and eat the meat. So in order to avoid any kind of confusion, halacha l'maisa, we go ahead and we just say don't eat the meat. The zrika works, the carbon is effective, but don't eat the meat under any circumstances. Top of ayin tes. V'ibay seima Rav Domer Rabbi Yoshua. Both the other possibilities of Rav holds like Rabbi Yoshua. This sign Rabbi Yoshua Omer Kol Hazvachim Sheva Torah Bein Shnitma Basar V'Chelev Kayim Bein Shnitma Chelev Ubasar Kayim Zorek Es Hadam. In general, again, Rabbi will say with all other karbanos, as long as there is some basar which is still in existence, whether it's the basar or whether it's the chelev, you could do zrika. We'll say this. We saw this in the Mishnah already. You could do this zrika. Remember again, by general individual karbanos, you need both basar and dam lechatchila. But basar doesn't have to be basar. You can even be chelev. However, nazir va'oseh pesach, when it comes to the carbon nazir or it comes to carbon pesach, nitma chelev ubasar kayim. If the chelev is tamei but the basar is in existence, zorek es hadam. Then halacha l'maisa you could do zrika. But by pesach you require actual basar. Nitma basar v'chelev kayim ein zorek es hadam. Halacha l'maisa. However, if the basar became tamei but the chelev was in existence, you can't do zrika. V'mzarak hurtza. But halacha l'maisa, if you did zrika, it works. Nitmu habaylim b'meis. If halacha l'maisa again, the owners became tamei tumas meis. Lo yizrok, you should not do zrika. V'mzarach la hurtza. But halacha l'maisa, if you did zrika, it would not work. So we'll say. So therefore, what comes out over here is something very incredible. So we'll say we're going to see. We're not finished with this. We'll stop over here for today. But we'll say, what we begin to see is this fundamental machlokes, Rabbi Nasan and the Rabbanan, namely by carbon. So again, we know our halacha l'maisa by general karbanos, right? General karbanos, we paskin like Rabbi Yoshua that lechatchila you need both basar v'dam b'diavad. If you just have dam, it's enough. By karbanos sibor, lechatchila, what? Dam is enough. The exception to that rule is Karban Pesach. Karban Pesach. Since Karban Pesach, ultimately the ikar is achila, therefore halacha lemaisa, and therefore I will say, even by other karbanos lechatchila, as long as you have chilev or basar, that's enough to make it lechatchila that you have basar and dam. Karban Pesach is going to be different according to the Mishnah, because again, Karban Pesach, the ikar is achila. But comes along Rav and says, by the way, not everybody agrees with that. There's the position of Rabbi Nassan, and Rabbi Nassan holds that even by Karban Pesach, achila is not ma'akev. Achila is not ma'akev. And therefore, again, halacha l'maisa, you, as long as you could do zrika of the Karban Pesach, halacha l'maisa, you fulfill your obligation and would not need to do Pesach Sheni. That being said, Rabbi Osai, even Rabbi Nassan agrees that what? That halacha l'maisa, when you shech the carbon for a particular group or particular individuals, those individuals must be fit, right? Remember again, you might think that because Rabbi Nassan holds that achila is not ma'akiv, therefore even if you shech the carbon on behalf of a chola or a zokain or an orel, it shouldn't matter. Kamashla, no. Even Rabbi Nassan agrees that chatchila you have to eat it. And certainly again, if you have someone invalid as part of the chabura, that person will disqualify the carbon. So we'll say, we'll stop over for today. We'll see the halacha l'maisa Meretz Hashem on the sugi tomorrow. Shkoyach. Jeremy, thank you. Say have a good day, everyone. Shkoyach.